morning. My name is Kiki Fontenot, and I'm here to share a little bit of tips with you guys on knowing when to plant edible crops in your school gardens, whether that's vegetables, herbs, spices, or fruit. So we have a lot of great resources at the Ag Center. One of the first ones that I want to highlight is our lawn and garden, our Get It Growing calendar that Dr. Heather Kirk-Ballard puts out. It has a lot of tips for all kinds of plants throughout the year. So if that's something you're interested in with your school garden, anything from vegetables to roses, this would be a helpful publication for you. There is a small fee for it. I think it's like $12, $15, but it's a wonderful calendar. The next thing I want to highlight for you guys is how to know when to grow vegetable crops in the school garden. So again, the Ag Center has several great resources. One is the Steps to Growing a Successful School Garden, and the second is the Louisiana Vegetable Planting Guide. Okay, both have tips on what months you should plant things, how far apart you should space them, and that kind of information. And what I wanted to do was just highlight one page. This is page 19 in the Steps to Growing a Successful School Garden, and let you know that people are often very rigid about, like, I can only plant warm season crops in the warm season, not in the cool season, or vice versa. But actually, our subtropical growing environment here in Louisiana lends us really nicely to kind of merging crops throughout and among the different seasons, as long as we hit those right windows. So if you take a look at this chart right here, I want you to notice several things that you're going to see here. If the blocks, the vegetable crop is listed on the left column. If the blocks are highlighted in green, that means that you would plant seeds of that crop directly into your garden bed. If the blocks are highlighted in red, that means you're going to put little transplants or small seedlings, so the tiny little plants that you get in 6-packs or maybe 4-inch pots, into the garden during those months. And if you see it in purple, that means that it could either be seeds or transplants that month. Either way, you're fine if you're starting from a seed or a small seedling. But what I want you to notice, like, let's look at snap beans, for instance. Right now while I'm videotaping this is September, okay? Many schools start in August, but actually starting the school garden in August can be really tricky just because you're coming in, you're trying to set up your classroom, get acquainted with your children, and learn a lot of, like, classroom management and skills and rules and how are we going to work this year out. So waiting until September is perfectly fine. So let's just take the first row, snap beans. You can plant snap beans in September in Louisiana. North, south, central, doesn't matter. But if you miss that month, don't worry about it. You can come back mid-January through March and plant them again. So you have both this fall that you could get that window of opportunity for planting in, or the early spring. Same with our cole crops like broccoli, cabbage, okay? They're in red. You're going to plant transplants into the school garden. We're never going to direct seed these. So you'd either start them in seeds in your classroom 5 to 6 weeks ahead of time, or just go buy some transplants. But you can plant broccoli and cabbage in September and October for a fall crop. But let's say you miss that window. You're like, oh, let's squeeze something in for the spring. We can come back mid-January through the end of March, North, Central, South Louisiana again, and plant it again and still harvest it before the school year's over. Same with lettuce. And if you look across many of the vegetables that we have listed, you're going to see both spring planting dates and fall planting dates for those vegetable crops. So you really do have a nice window of opportunity, even for spring things like tomatoes. If y'all came in early or mid-August, like the first week of school, and planted your tomatoes, you could get a nice tomato crop off in the fall versus planting them in the spring, mid-March through the end of April, and hoping you get a few before the school year lets out. So you have those opportunities to play around with those kind of dates. I also wanted to talk a little bit about herbs and spices. A lot of school gardens do really well with their herb crops. They're easier to maintain. They don't need a lot of insect management. They usually don't need a lot of water management. They can thrive on real low fertile soils. So if you forget to fertilize, you're still doing pretty good with your herbs, okay? Now, we have 2 different publications I wanted to tell you about. The first is the Herb Gardening in Louisiana. This is a guide. It doesn't matter if you're a school garden, a home gardener, a commercial, whatever. It tells you all about growing herbs in Louisiana. It tells you about shade and sun requirements and what they're used for and their historical relevance and their, relevance today in 2021, all right? But what I really, really like about this publication is at the very end of it, we have all these different herb cards set out, okay? So each herb is listed with a picture of it, so you know what it's supposed to look like when it's growing. Make sure you're not pulling the herb instead of a weed out. But it has this little symbol right here for the different seasons. Spring and summer are green and yellow. Winter and fall are red and blue. So you know just by looking at that card, is this a cool season crop or is it a warm season crop? Or is this an herb or a spice that can grow year round or be planted year round? So just by looking at that symbol, you know if it's an okay time of the year to plant it, all right? Each one of these also has the mature height and width of that plant. So you can think about that when you're spacing your herbs or your spices out in the garden, how big that mature plant is going to get, how far you should space it apart from the next one that you're planting in the garden. What I really like about these is we designed them so that they would be long and skinny, so you guys can cut them out, laminate them, and glue them to popsicle sticks or anything you want and stick them in the garden, and you have your plant cards already labeled for you. This guide gives you information on growing about 65 different herb crops, so it has tons of information. Now, the other guide on to my right here, the guide to growing a school herb garden, is great. It doesn't feature as many herbs, so we don't have 65 in there. But what we do is we feature the most common herbs grown in Louisiana. We tell you how and when to plant them and how far apart to space them. But what's perfect about this for the school garden is it also gives you a short or small activity to do with students with each of the herbs, right? So how to take rosemary and make it into a little candle or into a bar of soap, or how to take bay leaves and make them into, the wreaths that the first Olympians used to wear, and talk about history of the crops with the students. So this is also a really nice guide for you guys. Just want to zoom in a little closer on some of these herb cards just to show you in more detail. So see, here's basil, right? So this is a warm season crop, all right? So if you're planting it outside in South, Central, or North Louisiana, we want to plant it in the spring or in the fall. So after the frost, last danger of frost is over. Typically mid-March for South Louisiana, April 1st, North Louisiana, right? And we know that by these two symbols here. We know it's going to get about 1 to 3 feet tall and 1 to 3 feet wide. So you want to space your basil plants at least 12 to 18 inches apart, right? Give them that space to grow. Okay, coriander and cilantro. So cilantro is the leaves, coriander is the same plant, the seeds as you see pictured here, used two very different ways. Cilantro would be the herb. Herbs are always the leaves that we eat. If you're eating the root, the stem, or the seed, then we consider that a spice, all right? This is a cool season crop, so we would plant this in the cool season, all right, in the fall or in the winter time in Louisiana. It's going to continue growing until it gets so hot outside, so it'll grow into the warm season. But when it gets really hot, it just starts melting and just dying back. So we wouldn't want to plant this one, for instance, in the late spring or in the summertime because it just wouldn't thrive or do well. Again, we know our mature width and height here, again in inches to feet, so you know how far to space that out. And finally, lemongrass. There's lots of herbs like lemongrass and rosemary, y'all, that you can plant year round. That's why you're going to see it all 4 seasons. Now you might think, Kiki, lemongrass dies back in the winter. And that's true, but it's still a perfect time to dig it up, cut it, and divide it like you would other grasses, ornamental grasses, or say things like iris or things like that nature. Divide up that ground and respace it and replant it in the winter. It'll leaf back out in the spring. So lemongrass we can plant spring, summer, fall, winter, no big deal. It gets huge, 5 to 6 feet, 5 feet tall, 5 feet wide. Make sure you have a big space in the garden for something like that. All of these things are really fun to use with kids. You can make salsas with the cilantro, you can make pestos with the basil, and you can use the lemongrass in soaps, teas, candles, and even, flavoring drinks like iced tea or lemonade would be great with your kids for these things. So consider planting them in the school garden. And last but not least, a lot of schools ask me about planting fruit crops in the school garden. So trees and shrubs are great if you have this space, right? If you have an extra large area or you're looking to expand. Most of our fruit crops are going to be planted in the fall. September and October are great months for planting apples and pears and plums and pomegranates and things of that nature. Now, citrus trees, you guys, are not cold hardy at all in Louisiana. Gosh. So we would not plant those in the fall. We would plant our citrus crops in the spring, okay? So late February, March, April. We don't want to get them in the ground right before a big cold freeze. If you live in central or North Louisiana and you want to plant citrus in your school garden, I would consider doing it in a large pot so you can move it in and out when we get, freezing temperatures or close to or below freezing temperatures. But these are great trees to plant, apples and pears, because they're harvested August through September. Just remember, choose appropriate varieties. So Anna apples, Einsheimer apples, those are great for here in Louisiana. Blueberries, we can actually plant some of our southern highbush blueberries and harvest them March through June. Things like Jewel or Emerald are becoming a little bit more available on the market as far as southern highbush. If you plant rabbit eye blueberries, you'll still get them in, but it's going to be closer to like late May. So they're going to come in right as the school year is ending. But rabbit eye blueberries do great here in Louisiana. Blackberries, we harvest those in May. My tip with blackberries would be choose varieties that are thornless. You don't want your students bleeding and getting spiked. You have enough things to worry about. Citrus, harvested September through January, depending on the varieties you choose. Just remember, put them in the spring, not the fall. And if you live in areas where it gets a little colder, consider planting them in really big containers. Plums and pomegranates, excellent fruit choices, both harvested September and October. So these are things you definitely want to try in your school garden. We have this for sale publication at the LSU AgCenter, the Louisiana Home Fruit and Nut Production book. Excellent resource, $20, totally worth every penny. But we have a lot of free growing guides online as well. Our blackberry growing guide, our citrus production guide, our blueberry guides, different things of that nature are all online at lsuagcenter.com. So I hope you guys enjoy growing edible crops in your school. I hope you try something new and different and keep changing things up to keep student interest up. If you have questions, feel free to email me, Kiki Fontenot at agcenter.lsu.edu. Thank you.